Sometimes the moment that changes your life doesn't arrive with a shout, it arrives as a whisper. That's the first thing I remember about that night at the charity gala in Manhattan. The ballroom looked like something out of a movie, crystal chandeliers hanging 30 feet above us, soft gold lights spilling across white linen tables, a string quartet playing near the stage while waiters carried trays of champagne through clusters of donors and executives. It was the kind of night where everyone smiled a little too perfectly. I had attended dozens of events like this over the years, but this one mattered more than most because my daughter Lily was supposed to be happy. She had insisted I come, said it would mean a lot to her and Daniel. Daniel Brooks, her husband, had a way of fitting into rooms like this as if he had been born in them. Tall, confident, the kind of man who shook hands firmly, and remembered everyone's name. From across the ballroom he looked exactly the way a successful young husband should look, laughing with a group of investors near the bar. And for a while I allowed myself to believe everything in my daughter's life was exactly as good as it seemed. Then Lily appeared beside me. I hadn't seen her approach. One moment I was standing near the silent auction table pretending to care about a painting worth $50,000, and the next moment she was there, slipping her arm gently through mine the same way she used to when she was a little girl walking into school on the first day of kindergarten. "Dad," she whispered softly, leaning closer so no one else could hear. Her voice was calm, but something about it made the room feel smaller. I turned to look at her, and immediately noticed she had done her makeup more carefully than usual. Lily had never been someone who cared much about cosmetics. Growing up she was the kid who climbed trees in the backyard and came inside with grass stains on her jeans. But tonight the foundation on her cheek looked heavier, almost deliberate, like someone trying to hide a shadow that didn't belong there. When she tilted her head slightly under the chandelier light, I saw it. Just for a second. A faint discoloration beneath the edge of the makeup near her cheekbone. Not dramatic. Not the kind of thing anyone across the room would ever notice. But I noticed. A father notices things like that. My chest tightened in a quiet, uncomfortable way. "You okay, kiddo?" I asked, keeping my voice light because there were 100 people around us, and this was supposed to be a celebration. Lily smiled immediately, the same polite smile she had mastered at corporate dinners and charity events. "I'm fine," she said. "Just slipped on the stairs earlier. Clumsy me." She even laughed softly, like the explanation was harmless. But her hand was still holding my sleeve, and I could feel the smallest tremor in her fingers. Across the ballroom Daniel looked over in our direction, lifting his glass with a confident grin as if to toast us from 20 feet away. Lily noticed him looking. And in that single quiet second, her smile faded just enough for me to see something else underneath it. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Something closer to fear. That was the moment the entire evening stopped feeling like a party. Because when your daughter looks at you like that, you understand something immediately, and without explanation. Something in her world isn't right. And suddenly every instinct you have as a father wakes up all at once. Daniel started walking toward us through the crowd with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed the entire room belonged to him. He moved slowly, stopping every few steps to shake another hand, smiling the kind of polished smile that looks perfect under chandelier light. People liked him. I could see that clearly. A couple standing near the bar leaned toward each other and whispered something while watching him pass, the kind of quiet admiration that successful young professionals collect without even trying. If you looked only at the surface, Daniel Brooks looked like a man who had everything under control. Lily released my sleeve the moment she noticed him approaching, smoothing the front of her navy blue evening dress as if preparing for a photograph. The movement was small, almost automatic, but I noticed how quickly she did it. Her shoulders straightened. Her smile returned, practiced and careful. The same smile she used when greeting strangers. I had seen that smile before at business dinners, the kind people use when they want the room to believe everything is perfectly fine. Daniel reached us and slipped an arm lightly around Lily's back. "There you two are," he said, his voice easy and warm. "I was wondering where my favorite people disappeared to." Up close his confidence was even more obvious. His tuxedo fit perfectly, his hair still neat despite the crowded ballroom, and he carried himself like a man who expected the night to unfold exactly the way he wanted. He looked at me with that same smooth friendliness he had used the first time we met 2 years earlier. "Ethan, I hope the evening is treating you well. It is a beautiful event," I said calmly. My voice sounded steady, but my eyes moved briefly toward Lily's cheek again before I could stop myself. The makeup still hid most of the shadow I had noticed earlier, but now that I had seen it once, it was impossible to unsee it. Daniel followed my glance for a split second, then quickly returned his attention to the room. "The foundation raised nearly $2 million tonight," he said with a proud nod toward the stage. "Not bad for a single evening." Lily nodded beside him, but she said nothing. Instead, she reached for a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and held it with both hands, as if she needed something steady to anchor herself. Daniel's arm rested around her shoulders in a casual way that probably looked affectionate to everyone else in the room. To me it felt different. Not tight. Not aggressive. Just deliberate. Like someone placing a hand exactly where they wanted it. The orchestra shifted into a slower melody near the dance floor, and a few couples began moving toward the center of the ballroom. Daniel glanced in that direction. "We should probably greet the donors from Boston before they leave," he said to Lily, his tone still friendly but slightly firmer now. Lily nodded immediately. "Too quickly?" "Of course," she said. Then she turned toward me again. For a moment the practiced smile faded and the same quiet expression from earlier returned. It lasted only a heartbeat. Long enough for me to see the question in her eyes. Long enough for me to understand that whatever was happening in her life had not started tonight. Daniel gently guided her away through the crowd, his hands still resting along her back as they disappeared between tables and waiters carrying silver trays. I stood there beside the silent auction table, listening to the soft music and the polite laughter filling the room. Everything looked elegant. Everything looked calm. But something inside my chest had already shifted into a kind of quiet alertness that fathers understand without explanation. Because when your daughter gives you a look like that in a room full of people, you know one thing for certain. The story everyone else believes about her life is probably not the real one. For the next 20 minutes I stayed where I was, pretending to examine auction items while quietly watching the room. Experience teaches you something about people when you spend enough years in business meetings and boardrooms. The real conversations rarely happen at the center of attention. They happen at the edges, in the pauses, in the glances people think nobody notices. Daniel and Lily moved through the ballroom greeting donors exactly the way a successful young couple should. He spoke confidently, shaking hands, occasionally placing his hand gently at the small of Lily's back as he guided her from one group to another. From a distance it looked natural. Supportive even. But once you start noticing small details, it becomes difficult to stop. Each time someone spoke directly to Lily, Daniel subtly answered first, as if steering the conversation. Each time she laughed, her eyes briefly searched the room before settling again on the person in front of her. It was the kind of behavior you might miss if you were not looking for it. I finished the sparkling water in my glass and set it on a passing tray. The music shifted again, something softer now, and couples continued drifting toward the dance floor. I watched Lily excuse herself from a conversation and step toward the hallway that led to the restrooms. Daniel remained behind with a group of men near the bar. For a moment I considered letting it go. Fathers have a dangerous habit of imagining problems where none exist. But the image of that faint shadow on her cheek returned to my mind with uncomfortable clarity. I followed her. The hallway outside the ballroom was quieter, the music now muffled behind thick doors. Lily stood near a tall mirror adjusting the side of her hair, as if checking her reflection under the softer lights of the corridor. When she saw me in the mirror, she froze for a second. Then she turned slowly. "Dad," she said, forcing a small smile. "You do not have to follow me everywhere." I leaned casually against the wall beside her, keeping my voice calm the same way I would during a tense negotiation. "I just needed a break from all that champagne and small talk," I said. "These events get louder every year." She nodded, but her hands remained near her cheek, almost protective. Up close the makeup was easier to see. Carefully applied. Slightly heavier on one side. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush the question. Lily, I said quietly, how did you really slip on those stairs? The smile faded again. For a moment she looked exactly the way she had when she was 12 years old and had broken a window playing baseball in the backyard, trying to decide whether to tell the truth or invent a better story. Her eyes lowered toward the marble floor. It was nothing, she said softly. Just clumsy timing. Then the ballroom doors opened behind us and a burst of music and laughter spilled into the hallway. Daniel's voice followed it a second later as he stepped out, still smiling, adjusting his cufflink as if he had simply been searching for his wife. His eyes moved from Lily to me and back again. The smile never left his face. But something in his expression sharpened just slightly. And Lily noticed it immediately. Her shoulders straightened again, the careful smile returning like a switch being flipped back on. In that moment I realized something important. Whatever conversation my daughter and I were about to have, it was not going to happen here. Not with Daniel Brooks standing 10 feet away watching every word. Daniel stopped a few feet away from us in the hallway, adjusting the cuff of his jacket as if he had simply wandered out for fresh air. The music from the ballroom spilled through the open doors behind him, soft strings and polite laughter drifting into the quieter corridor. He smiled again, that same effortless expression that seemed permanently attached to his face. There you are, he said lightly, glancing at Lily before looking at me. I was wondering where my wife disappeared to. Lily answered before I could say anything. I just stepped out for a moment, she said quickly. Her voice sounded steady, but the words came a little faster than usual. Daniel nodded, as if satisfied, and stepped closer. The hallway lights reflected faintly off the marble floor beneath us. Up close he carried the calm confidence of someone completely comfortable in every room he entered. Ethan, he said, turning slightly toward me, the Boston donors are asking about you. Apparently someone mentioned your company during the auction presentation. His tone was friendly, almost flattering. I gave a small nod. I will come back in a moment, I said. Lily and I were just talking. For a fraction of a second something shifted in Daniel's eyes. Not anger. Not even irritation. Just calculation. Then the smile returned exactly where it had been before. Of course, he replied smoothly. Family first. Lily stood very still beside him. I noticed how her hands remained folded together in front of her, as if she did not trust herself to move them. Daniel glanced briefly toward the mirror behind her, and reached up to adjust a loose strand of her hair near her cheek. The gesture looked gentle to anyone who might have walked by in that moment. But Lily flinched almost invisibly before catching herself and forcing a small laugh. You missed a spot, Daniel said softly, brushing his thumb lightly near the edge of her makeup as if helping her fix something. Then he stepped back and looked at both of us again. I will grab another drink before heading back in, he added casually. Do not take too long. The speeches start in 10 minutes. He walked down the hallway toward the bar at the end of the corridor, leaving us alone again for the first time since the ballroom doors had opened. The moment he disappeared around the corner, Lily let out a slow breath she had clearly been holding. The hallway suddenly felt quieter. I looked at her without speaking for a few seconds. Sometimes silence tells people more than questions. She avoided my eyes at first, studying the floor as if the pattern in the marble tiles had become extremely interesting. Then she spoke. He worries when I disappear too long during events, she said quietly. I kept my voice even. That sounded less like worry and more like supervision. She looked up at me quickly. Dad? The word came out sharper than before, but the tension behind it faded just as quickly. Her shoulders lowered slightly, and for the first time that evening she looked tired instead of nervous. It is complicated, she said. I nodded slowly. Most things worth fixing are. For a moment she seemed like she might say something else. The words hovered just behind her eyes, waiting for permission to exist. Then the sound of Daniel's voice echoed faintly from the bar down the hallway, laughing with someone we could not see. Lily's posture changed immediately. The careful smile returned once again, the same practiced expression she had worn all evening. "We should go back," she said softly. But as we turned toward the ballroom doors, I realized something that had not been clear an hour earlier. My daughter was not just attending this gala tonight. She was performing in it. The ballroom doors closed behind us with a soft thud, and the warm noise of the gala wrapped around us again like nothing had happened in the hallway. The chandeliers still glowed overhead. Waiters still moved between tables carrying trays of sparkling wine. On the stage, a host in a black tuxedo was thanking donors while a large screen displayed numbers climbing higher with every pledge. To anyone watching from across the room, the evening looked perfect. Lily stepped beside Daniel again, as if sliding back into a role she had rehearsed 100 times. He placed his hand lightly along her back once more and guided her toward a table near the front where several guests were already taking their seats. I followed a few steps behind, watching the way she moved through the crowd. Careful. Measured. Like someone who understood exactly where she was expected to stand. Daniel pulled out a chair for her when we reached the table, the gesture smooth and polite. A couple seated nearby smiled approvingly. "Such a gentleman," the woman whispered to her husband as she adjusted her napkin. Daniel nodded politely, accepting the compliment with quiet confidence. Lily thanked him softly and sat down, smoothing the fabric of her dress across her lap. I took the seat beside her while Daniel sat on her other side. From the outside we probably looked like any proud father attending an event with his successful daughter and son-in-law. But once you see tension in a room, it becomes impossible to ignore it. The host on stage continued speaking about scholarships and community programs while the audience listened politely. Applause rose and faded like waves across the ballroom. Daniel leaned slightly toward Lily and whispered something I could not hear. She nodded immediately, almost automatically. Then he leaned back again, scanning the room with the relaxed awareness of someone who liked knowing exactly who was watching him. I noticed Lily had not touched the glass of water in front of her. Her hands rested quietly together on the table, fingers gently intertwined as if holding themselves still. The stage lights shifted and the host announced the final pledge total for the evening. The crowd responded with enthusiastic applause. Daniel joined in easily, clapping with the same polished enthusiasm everyone else displayed. Lily clapped too, but her movements were smaller, quieter. I kept my eyes on the stage, though my thoughts were no longer there. Instead they drifted back through the past 2 years, replaying small moments that had seemed harmless at the time. The way Lily's calls home had slowly become shorter. The way she sometimes sounded distracted during conversations that used to last an hour. The few dinners Daniel had cancelled at the last minute with polite explanations about business travel. None of those things had felt important when they happened. Life moves quickly when your children grow up and build their own lives. Parents learn to step back and trust the choices their kids make. But sitting at that table, watching my daughter carefully measure every movement beside her husband, those memories began rearranging themselves into something else. Not proof. Not certainty. Just a quiet pattern that had been hiding in plain sight. The applause faded again as the host invited everyone to stand and enjoy the final part of the evening. Chairs slid back across the floor and guests began rising from their tables. Daniel stood first and offered his hand to Lily with a confident smile. She accepted it without hesitation. When she stood, the light from the chandelier caught her face again. For just a moment the makeup shifted under the glow. And the faint shadow beneath it appeared once more before disappearing as she turned toward the crowd. That was when I realized something important. Whatever story Lily had been telling the world tonight, it was not the one she had whispered to me earlier. And the truth behind that whisper was still waiting somewhere beyond the music and the applause. I have learned something about crowded rooms over the years. The louder the celebration becomes, the easier it is to hide quiet truths in plain sight. The gala shifted into its final phase as people stood from their tables and drifted toward the dance floor. Soft jazz replaced the formal orchestra piece and the lights dimmed slightly, giving the room a warmer glow. Waiters appeared again with fresh trays of drinks and small desserts balanced carefully on silver plates. The kind of atmosphere designed to make everyone relax. Daniel seemed completely at home in it. He greeted people with the same effortless confidence he had shown all evening, occasionally resting his hand along Lily's back while introducing her to another donor or shaking hands with someone who clearly believed he was talking to a rising star. To anyone watching, they looked like the perfect young couple building a powerful social circle together. Lily followed the rhythm of the evening exactly the way she was expected to. She smiled when people spoke to her. She nodded politely during conversations about charity programs and business ventures. Every response sounded thoughtful and composed. But once you start paying attention, small details begin to stand out. When someone addressed Lily directly, she answered quickly and then glanced briefly toward Daniel before finishing her sentence, almost like checking if her words matched the script. When someone asked her about their honeymoon last year in Napa Valley, she laughed softly and gave a charming answer about the vineyards and the California sunshine. Yet her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass just enough for me to notice. Daniel noticed too. Not the tension in her hand, but the fact that she was holding the glass at all. He gently reached over and lifted it from her fingers with an easy smile. "Careful," he said lightly, loud enough for the couple beside us to hear. "You promised you would not overdo the champagne tonight." The couple laughed politely. Lily nodded, smiling again as if the comment was harmless. "He is the responsible one," she said quietly. Daniel set the glass on the table behind him and guided her toward another group across the ballroom. The movement was smooth, controlled, almost graceful. I remained a few steps back, watching the scene unfold while the music carried softly through the room. I had spent most of my life negotiating contracts worth millions of dollars, reading expressions across conference tables, recognizing when someone was hiding something behind polite conversation. Those instincts do not disappear just because the room has chandeliers instead of office lights. And the longer I watched Daniel and Lily move through that crowd, the clearer one thing became. Daniel was not simply participating in the evening. He was managing it. Every introduction. Every conversation. Every moment Lily spoke to someone. All of it flowed through him like a quiet current beneath the surface of the gala. Eventually the music slowed into a gentle dance rhythm. Couples stepped toward the center of the ballroom again. Daniel turned to Lily and extended his hand with the same confident smile he had worn all night. "One dance before the evening ends," he said warmly. Lily hesitated for the briefest moment before placing her hand in his. They moved toward the dance floor with the same elegance everyone else expected from them. From across the room they looked effortless, turning slowly beneath the chandelier light, while other couples circled around them. But when Lily's face turned toward me for a second during the dance, I saw it again. Not the makeup. Not the shadow beneath it. Something deeper. The same quiet question she had carried in the hallway earlier. And in that moment I understood something that made the entire ballroom feel colder despite the warm lights and music. My daughter was not simply attending this night. She was surviving it. The dance floor glowed under the chandelier light as couples moved slowly to the soft rhythm of the band, and from where I stood near the edge of the ballroom it looked almost peaceful. Daniel guided Lily through the steps with the calm precision of someone who had practiced this kind of moment many times before. His posture was confident, one hand steady at her back, the other holding hers as they turned gently among the other couples. Anyone watching would see elegance. Balance. The kind of graceful partnership people admire from across the room. But I was not watching the room. I was watching my daughter. Lily followed each step perfectly, her movements smooth and controlled, but there was a quiet stiffness in her shoulders that had not been there when she was younger. When she was a teenager, she used to dance around our kitchen on Sunday mornings while pancakes cooked on the stove, laughing whenever she missed a step. Back then dancing had looked like freedom. Tonight it looked more like discipline. Daniel leaned down and said something close to her ear. From across the floor I could not hear the words, but I saw the immediate change in Lily's expression. Her smile widened, just slightly, the same careful smile she had used all evening when speaking to donors and guests. She nodded once, like someone acknowledging instructions. Then they continued turning beneath the lights while the music carried through the ballroom. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the kind that appears when a memory connects to something happening right in front of you. For years Lily had been the most independent person I knew. In college she argued with professors about economics and policy. She once drove 800 miles across 3 states with 2 friends just to see a concert in Nashville because she thought adventure was more valuable than sleep. She had never been the kind of person who waited for permission to speak, or move, or live her life. Yet the woman standing on that dance floor now moved as if every step had already been approved. The song ended and polite applause rippled through the crowd. Couples began drifting away from the center of the ballroom toward the dessert tables and the lounge area near the windows. Daniel kept Lily's hand in his for a moment longer before releasing it, and guiding her back toward the guests waiting to greet them. I stepped aside to let them pass, pretending to study a sculpture displayed near the wall. As they approached, Lily's eyes met mine again for the briefest second. The look lasted no longer than a heartbeat. But it said more than words would have allowed in that crowded room. It was the same look she had given me years ago, when she scraped her knee learning to ride a bicycle and tried to pretend she was fine. Not panic. Not drama. Just a quiet signal that something hurt, and she did not know how to explain it yet. Daniel placed a fresh glass of water in her hand as they stopped near another group of guests. "Hydration," he said lightly, smiling at the people around them. Everyone laughed again. Lily thanked him politely and took a small sip. I watched the scene from across the room while the music started again in the background. And in that moment a thought settled firmly in my mind, calm and clear despite the noise of the gala. Whatever was happening in my daughter's life had been happening for a long time. Tonight was simply the first time I had finally learned how to see it. The evening continued drifting forward with the slow rhythm of polite music and quiet conversation, but for me the room had already changed. Once you notice something out of place, the entire picture begins to rearrange itself. I moved toward one of the tall windows overlooking the city, giving myself a clear view of the ballroom without standing directly inside the crowd. From there I could watch Lily and Daniel without drawing attention. Outside the glass, Manhattan stretched into the night, streets glowing like thin ribbons of light 20 floors below. Inside, the gala carried on exactly as planned. Donors laughed. Cameras flashed near the stage. The band shifted into another relaxed melody, while servers replaced empty glasses with fresh ones. Daniel stood at the center of another circle of guests, speaking with the easy confidence of someone who had spent years mastering rooms like this. Every few minutes someone shook his hand or patted his shoulder, as if welcoming him further into their world. Lily stood beside him the entire time, her posture elegant, her expression warm, answering questions when they came her way. From a distance she looked composed. But distance can hide many things. When the group around them shifted slightly, I noticed Lily adjust the sleeve of her dress higher along her shoulder. It was a quick movement, almost unconscious. Then Daniel's hand settled along her back again, guiding her toward another conversation before she had time to move on her own. I have spent decades in business watching partnerships form and collapse. The strongest partnerships allow both people space to stand on their own. What I was watching across that ballroom was something different. Daniel was not simply beside Lily. He was always just slightly ahead of her, steering introductions, choosing when they moved, controlling the rhythm of every interaction. A few minutes later a photographer approached their group, raising a camera with a polite smile. "Quick photo for the Foundation website," he said. Everyone gathered closer together. Daniel placed his arm around Lily's shoulders and pulled her gently into position beside him. The flash burst once, bright against the chandeliers. In that brief white light I saw Lily's expression clearly before the smile returned. Not fear. Not anger. Something quieter than that. Something like exhaustion hidden beneath perfect manners. The photographer thanked them and stepped away. Daniel glanced at the preview screen on the camera and laughed with the other guests as if the moment had been flawless. Lily nodded politely beside him. I turned away from the window and began walking slowly along the edge of the ballroom. The music faded slightly as I reached a quieter corner near the hallway that led toward the elevators. I stopped there, letting the noise of the event continue behind me while my thoughts settled into something clearer than they had been all night. When your child is young, protecting them feels simple. You teach them to look both ways before crossing the street. You remind them to wear a seatbelt. You make sure they come home before midnight. But when they grow up, protection becomes something more complicated. You cannot control their choices. You cannot follow them into every room. All you can do is pay attention when something does not feel right. And standing there at the edge of that glittering gala, watching my daughter perform another flawless smile beside her husband, I understood something that had not been clear earlier in the evening. Tonight was not simply about what I had seen. It was about what I had finally decided to stop ignoring. I remained near the hallway for several minutes, letting the quiet space clear my thoughts while the music and conversation from the ballroom continued behind me. The city lights outside the tall windows flickered across the marble floor, and the soft echo of the band drifted through the corridor like distant waves. I had spent most of my life solving problems by acting quickly, by pushing forward before hesitation could slow the moment. But fatherhood teaches you something different. Sometimes the smartest move is patience. Sometimes you watch first. The ballroom doors opened again and Lily stepped into the hallway alone. She had probably told Daniel she needed a moment, the same polite explanation people use when they need fresh air during crowded events. When she saw me standing near the elevators, she stopped for a second, clearly surprised. "Dad," she said quietly, walking closer. "I thought you went back to the table." I gave a small shrug. I needed a quieter place to think. She leaned lightly against the wall beside me, folding her arms across herself as if the cooler hallway air had suddenly made her cold. Up close, the careful makeup still hid most of the faint shadow near her cheek, but the effort behind it was easier to see now. The bright lights of the ballroom had required perfection. The hallway did not. For a few seconds either of us spoke. The silence felt familiar in a strange way, like the quiet moments we used to share during long drives when Lily was younger, and the radio was the only thing filling the car. Finally she let out a slow breath. "You are worried," she said. It was not a question. I nodded once. "Yes." She looked toward the elevator doors, watching the small digital numbers above them change as a car moved somewhere higher in the building. "You always notice things," she said softly. "Even when I was little." I leaned against the wall beside her, keeping my voice calm. "That is part of the job description." A faint smile touched her lips for a second, but it faded quickly. Her fingers tightened slightly around her own arms. "Tonight is important for Daniel," she said after a moment. "The foundation board likes him. Opportunities come from rooms like this." I listened without interrupting. She continued speaking carefully, choosing each word as if placing it in the right order mattered. "He works very hard to build these connections." I nodded again, but my eyes stayed on her face. "And how hard do you have to work tonight?" The question hung in the hallway between us. Lily looked down at the floor, tracing the thin lines in the marble with her eyes. For a moment I thought she might change the subject the way she had earlier in the evening. But instead she spoke in a voice quieter than before. "Sometimes it is easier to keep things smooth," she said. "Events like this run better when everyone stays calm." I studied her expression carefully. "That sounds less like a gala and more like a negotiation." She let out a small breath. That almost sounded like a laugh. Almost. Then she finally looked up at me again. There was no music in the hallway. No applause. No crowd to perform for. Just the quiet truth sitting between a father and his daughter. And in that quiet moment I realized something important. Lily had not come into the hallway by accident. She had come looking for me. The hallway remained quiet for several seconds after Lily's words settled between us. The distant music from the ballroom drifted through the doors behind her, but out here the noise felt far away, like another world continuing without us. Lily shifted slightly against the wall and looked toward the elevators again, watching the numbers change slowly above the closed doors. "You always ask the questions I hope you will not ask," she said softly. I kept my voice calm. "That usually means the questions matter." She gave a small nod, almost to herself. "Daniel believes control keeps everything running smoothly," she said after a moment. "He thinks life works better when nothing unexpected happens." I studied her expression carefully. "And do you believe that too?" Lily hesitated before answering. Her eyes drifted back toward the ballroom doors as if she could see through them to the crowd inside. "I believe peace is easier when everyone avoids conflict," she said. The answer sounded thoughtful, practiced, like something she had repeated many times before. I leaned slightly closer to the wall beside her. "Peace and silence are not always the same thing." She did not respond right away. Instead, she reached up and adjusted the sleeve of her dress again, the same quiet motion I had noticed earlier across the ballroom. The hallway lights reflected softly off the polished marble floor. After a few seconds, she lowered her hand and looked at me again. "You always made things sound simple when I was younger," she said. "If something was wrong, you said we would fix it." I nodded slowly. "That rule still applies." Her expression softened slightly, but the tiredness behind it remained. "Some problems are more complicated than a broken bicycle chain in the driveway," she said quietly. The memory made me smile faintly. "True. But the principle is the same. First you figure out what actually happened. Then you decide what needs to change." Lily looked down at her hands again. "Daniel does not like problems becoming public," she said carefully. "He believes strong people solve things privately." I listened to the words, but what mattered more was the way she said them. Not defensive. Not angry. Just careful. I chose my reply slowly. Strong people do not hide problems. They handle them. The elevator bell chimed softly behind us as a car arrived on the floor, but neither of us moved toward it. Lily stood there for another long moment before finally speaking again. "You always notice the details," she said. "Even tonight." I gave a small nod. "You noticed I noticed." That almost brought another smile to her face. Almost. She leaned her shoulder against the wall again, taking a quiet breath before continuing. "I did not expect you to see it so quickly," she admitted. The hallway felt even quieter after that sentence. I kept my voice steady. A father notices things about his daughter that the rest of the world does not. Lily looked at me directly now, the careful performance she had worn all evening finally fading away. "Daniel believes appearances matter more than anything," she said. "That is why tonight had to be perfect." I studied her face for a long moment before answering. "Appearances matter less than truth." She did not argue with that. Instead, she simply nodded once and looked toward the ballroom doors again, where the music and laughter continued without interruption. And in that quiet hallway, with the Gala still shining on the other side of those doors, I realized something important. Tonight had never really been about the charity event at all. It had been about the moment my daughter finally decided she was ready to let someone see past the performance. The hallway stayed quiet after Lily's last words, and for a moment neither of us moved. The soft music from the ballroom continued through the doors behind her, but it sounded distant now, like a celebration happening in another building instead of just a few steps away. Lily stood with her back against the wall, her hands folded loosely in front of her, the same careful posture she had carried all evening. But something about her expression had changed. The performance was gone. In its place was the daughter I had known for 30 years. She took a slow breath and glanced toward the ballroom doors again. "He will notice I am gone." "Too long," she said quietly. I nodded once. "Then we should not waste the time." She studied my face for a moment, almost like she was measuring how much truth the moment could hold. "Daniel likes things to stay controlled," she said carefully. "Conversations. Decisions. Even the way people react." I kept my voice steady. "Control can look very impressive from the outside." She let out a faint breath that almost sounded like agreement. He believes discipline keeps relationships strong. She continued. No chaos. No public disagreements. Everything calm. I listened to her words, but my attention stayed on the tone behind them. It was the tone of someone explaining rules that had been repeated many times before. And if something does not stay calm? I asked quietly. Lily's eyes dropped to the floor again. Then he becomes disappointed. The word hung in the air between us. Carefully chosen. Carefully limited. I leaned slightly closer to the wall beside her. Disappointed people do not usually leave shadows under someone's makeup. She closed her eyes for a brief second when I said that. Not from shock. More like relief that the truth had finally been spoken out loud. When she opened them again, the careful mask from the gala was completely gone. You were not supposed to see that tonight, she said softly. I gave a small shrug. That was never my decision. For a few seconds she simply looked at me. The quiet hallway gave her the space she had not had all evening. He does not lose control in public, she said. That would damage his reputation. I nodded slowly. But private moments are different. Lily did not answer directly. Instead, she looked toward the elevator again, watching the small digital numbers glow above the doors. He says people only respect strength, she said after a moment. He thinks showing weakness invites problems. I kept my voice calm. And what does he call it when someone hides things instead of fixing them? Lily did not respond right away. The music from the ballroom shifted again into a slower tune while voices drifted faintly through the doors. Finally she spoke. He calls it protecting the relationship. I studied her face carefully. And what do you call it? She hesitated for a long moment before answering. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than anything she had said all evening. I call it exhausting. The honesty in that word filled the hallway more powerfully than any speech from the stage earlier that night. I straightened slightly and looked toward the ballroom doors where the celebration continued without pause. Then tonight might be the first honest moment you have had in a long time. Lily nodded slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a little for the first time since the gala began. And in that quiet corridor, with the music and applause still echoing beyond the doors, I understood something clearly. My daughter was not asking me to solve her life. She was simply showing me the truth she had been carrying alone. The hallway remained still after Lily spoke that word, exhausting, as if the building itself understood how heavy it had been for her to finally say it out loud. The music from the ballroom drifted softly through the doors again, the distant rhythm of another slow dance beginning while laughter followed somewhere near the stage. For a moment neither of us spoke. Lily looked toward the floor, her shoulders lowered now in a way they had not been all evening. The careful posture she had worn through the gala was gone. What remained was something more honest. I let the silence settle because sometimes people need a moment to realize they are no longer carrying something alone. After a few seconds she looked back toward the ballroom doors. He will start looking for me soon, she said quietly. I nodded once. Probably. She drew a slow breath and straightened slightly, though not with the same rigid composure she had shown earlier. You always told me that problems get worse when people pretend they do not exist, she said. I remember that, I replied. You said it when I tried to hide a failing grade in high school. I allowed a faint smile. And what happened after that? You made me show you the test and then we figured out how to fix the class. I nodded again. Exactly. Lily studied my face for a long moment, as if measuring the distance between the memory and the present. This situation is not a math test, she said softly. No, I answered. But the principle is still the same. She glanced once more toward the ballroom where the sound of applause rose briefly before fading again. Daniel believes problems disappear when they stay quiet, she said. I shook my head slightly. Problems do not disappear. They simply wait. Lily absorbed that without arguing. After a few seconds she spoke again, her voice steadier now. Tonight you saw something he works very hard to hide. I met her eyes. I saw something you worked very hard to hide. She gave a small nod, accepting that correction. The elevator chimed softly behind us again, but neither of us moved toward it. The hallway lights cast a gentle reflection across the marble floor while the city glowed through the distant windows at the end of the corridor. Lily lifted her hand and carefully brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, a simple movement that looked more natural than anything she had done all evening in the ballroom. I was not planning to talk about this tonight, she admitted. Gala nights are supposed to stay perfect. I leaned lightly against the wall beside her. Perfection is usually the least honest version of reality. That earned a faint, tired smile. She looked toward the ballroom doors once more before speaking again. If I go back in there now, he will expect the same version of the evening to continue. I nodded. He probably will. Lily considered that for a moment. Then she asked the question that had clearly been forming in her mind since she stepped into the hallway earlier. What would you do? I did not answer immediately. Instead, I looked toward the doors leading back into the bright ballroom where music, donors, and cameras still celebrated the success of the evening. Then I looked back at my daughter standing beside me in the quiet corridor. I would stop pretending everything is fine, I said calmly. Lily held my gaze for several seconds after that. The music behind the doors continued, the gala still glowing exactly the way Daniel wanted it to look. But in the quiet hallway outside that room, something had already changed. For a long moment after I said those words, neither of us moved. The music from the ballroom continued drifting through the doors, smooth and elegant, the kind of sound designed to make an evening feel flawless. Inside that room, people were still celebrating the success of the charity event. Cameras were still flashing. Glasses were still being raised in polite toasts. From the outside, it looked like a perfect night. Lily stood beside me in the quiet hallway and slowly exhaled, the kind of breath someone takes when they realize something important has finally been spoken out loud. She looked toward the ballroom doors again, but this time her expression was different. Earlier that evening she had looked at those doors the way someone looks at a stage they are expected to return to. Now she looked at them like someone deciding whether the performance was finally over. If I walk back in there, she said softly, everyone will expect the same version of the night to continue. I nodded calmly. Most people in that room are not paying attention to your life. They are paying attention to the event. She considered that quietly. Daniel will notice. Yes, I said. He probably will. She leaned her shoulder lightly against the wall again, thinking. For years Lily had been the kind of person who solved problems by moving forward quickly. That had always been one of the things I admired about her. But tonight the decision in front of her required something different. It required honesty. After a few seconds she looked at me again. You always told me confidence means being able to stand in the truth even when it makes people uncomfortable. I gave a small nod. That lesson still applies. She glanced toward the elevator doors, then back at the ballroom entrance. The muffled sound of laughter drifted out again as someone inside finished a speech. Finally she straightened away from the wall. Not stiff. Not rehearsed. Just steady. I do not think I want to keep pretending tonight, she said. The sentence was quiet, but there was strength behind it now that had not been there earlier. I watched her carefully for a moment before answering. Then do not. Lily gave a faint smile, the first genuine one I had seen from her all evening. You make it sound simple. Most honest decisions are simple, I replied. They are just not always easy. The elevator chimed softly again behind us, but neither of us turned toward it. Instead, Lily stepped toward the ballroom doors. She paused there for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the handle while the music continued inside. Then she looked back at me one last time. Thank you for noticing, she said quietly. I met her gaze. That is what fathers do. She nodded once, then opened the door and stepped back into the warm light of the gala. The music grew louder for a moment before the door closed again behind her. I remained in the hallway for another few seconds, listening to the celebration continue on the other side of that door. From the outside the night would probably look exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. The chandeliers would still glow. The donors would still smile. Daniel Brooks would still believe the evening was unfolding exactly the way he planned. But something had changed in that quiet hallway that no one in the ballroom had seen. My daughter had stopped performing. And sometimes the most powerful moment in a long story is the one where someone finally decides they are done pretending.